Heinz is proud to partner The Urbanist on Monocle Radio. Heinz is a leading global real estate investment manager. Heinz owns and operates $93 billion of assets across property types and on behalf of a diverse group of institutional and private wealth clients. Heinz' ambition? Well, in the words of its chairman and CEO Jeffrey Heinz, to be the best real estate investor, manager and partner in the world. Find out how Heinz is making that dream a reality. Head to heinz.com now. Heinz, a leader in real estate investing and management since 1957. Hello and welcome to The Urbanist, Monocle's programme all about the built environment. I'm your host, Andrew Tuck. Coming up.
For a long time, designers would pick materials for aesthetic reasons without really looking into where they're sourced from, what are the supply chains, how far do they travel to get to a site.
How can our choice of building materials positively affect things like sustainability and resilience when it comes to making cities? Back in April 2024, we investigated some of the innovations occurring in the materials sector, which gave designers and developers more choice in what would make up their buildings. Today, we take this further and we see how thinking differently about materials can influence the economic picture of a developing city plot or help create a circular economy. We browse a recent A to Z of available resources, get an explainer on using soil for structures, and see what's new at the world's leading trade fair for architecture, materials and systems. That's all ahead over the next 30 minutes here on The Urbanist with me, Andrew Tuck. We start today with Hattie Hartman, an American architect and urban planner now based in London, who heads up the post of sustainability editor at the Architects Journal, as well as hosting the AJ's Climate Champions podcast. Hattie recently released Materials, an environmental primer, a reference book aimed at allowing architects to make responsible material choices. Its chapters are written by subject experts and explore the far-reaching impacts of different materials, from health to biodiversity. Hattie joined Monocle's Carlotta Ribello in the studio recently, and Carlotta began by asking where her interest in sustainable architecture and design began.
I trained as an architect in America and have been based in the UK for more than 30 years. And I worked as an architect for over a decade before becoming an architectural journalist, writing primarily for the Architects Journal. And when I first started, shortly thereafter, I created the post of sustainability editor at the AJ. And that was more than 15 years ago. Nobody was really talking about sustainability. I felt like I was talking into a void. Now that has changed dramatically, and this arena is changing so fast. When I first started writing about sustainable design, the discourse was all about operational carbon. That means the energy required to operate a building. Now, something called embodied carbon or upfront carbon has come to the fore. And any designer today really needs to be thinking about both, what we call whole life carbon, what it takes to operate a building and what it takes to build a building. And understanding what it takes to build a building means understanding the materials. And for a long time, designers would pick materials for aesthetic reasons, based on samples or even based on catalogs, without really looking into where they're sourced from, what are the supply chains, how far do they travel to get to a site. All those issues now are of top importance, and that's what we try to explain in our book.
Now, the book is divided into chapters, each of them dedicated to a specific material and with subject experts taking part. Tell us a bit about not only the structure, but, how you devised the plan for the book. And was the goal that this would become a guide for those practicing, or just a call to action of the importance of all these different materials?
We like to call this a book for your desk, not for the shelf. And this is really for anybody interested in learning more about construction materials, but primarily for designers, architects, engineers, other built environment professionals. We wanted to make the book as easy to navigate as possible. So we've organized it as an A to Z. So if you're interested in finding out more about steel, you go to S, you find steel. If you want to know about hemp, you go to the hemp chapter. And you can really dive into a lot of technical detail because each chapter is written by an expert. And because this field is changing so fast, we felt it was really important to have further resources where you can go if you want the latest, most current information.
Do you find that in cities of today, are developers and architects and planners taking more risks in terms of the materials that they choose, in choosing a material that's perhaps newer or less used, or are the traditional ones still king or queen?
I would say that the most progressive developers really are experimenting and pioneering, and everyone wants to say they're pioneering. So having a good narrative, having a good story to tell, even if it's only about one particular aspect of a project, is becoming more and more current. There's still a long way to go.
Could I dare you to answer, what should we be using less of and what should we be using more of?
Well, there's been a lot in the broadsheets recently about what materials are good and what materials are bad. Concrete is bad. Timber is going to save the planet. It's really not that simple. And what we advocate in this book is the right amount of the right material in the right place, which sounds like a truism, and it's not so hard to do when you're actually designing a project. I think the first step is really to use less of anything, less concrete, less steel. But concrete and steel are not going to go away. They're going to be with us for some time. So we're very fortunate to have expert engineers from Expedition writing on concrete, and Will Arnold from the Institute of Structural Engineers, one of the authors on steel, people who are really on the forefront of this agenda, explaining not only how to use less, but how to reduce the impacts in what you do use. Now, there are many materials that architects are using more and more of. One I would say is straw. In France, there are more than 6,000 straw buildings, including schools and multifamily housing, that have been built over the last decade. That has yet to happen in this country, but people are starting to look at it. And we have Barbara Jones, really one of the foremost experts on straw. She's written whole books on straw building, writing on straw for us.
Was there a particular material that surprised you that, of course, you would have been familiar with already before starting work on this book, but through the work on the book that really is now seen in a different light?
I think, to me, the most exciting discovery was building with earth. You often hear about rammed earth, but what's becoming more and more current at the forefront of this agenda is using excavated site materials to make compressed earth blocks that you can actually reuse on the same site. So almost every building project is going to be excavating soil from a site. Each soil is different, needs to be analyzed, needs to be tested, but often this can be reused. And this is starting to happen in Belgium. Also, even in a commercial project on King's Cross designed by Bennett's Associates, compressed earth blocks have been used. So it's all possible.
Now, how much attention when choosing a material should be paid to, I guess the entire supply chain? Because it goes beyond just thinking about, as you were mentioning earlier, initially was about perhaps what's more readily available or for aesthetic reasons, but it goes beyond that. How much do supply chains influence the selection of a material?
This is where designers can really make a difference by asking tough questions of manufacturers and suppliers. Because this information is not always readily available, it's not transparent. More and more manufacturers are starting to release something called an Environmental Product Declaration, an EPD, which is, it's not the environmental credentials of a project, it's more like a food label. It tells you what's in a project. But these are very technical and tough to wade through, and this is what more and more designers now are trying to tackle. So we have, in our book, we have a 4-page quick guide, how to read an EPD, because this is something that every designer now needs to get up to speed with.
in your introduction when you were describing your background and how this became a subject matter of interest to you. You were talking about your background as an architect before moving into journalism. Do you feel like by having seen both worlds, you're able, when putting together this book, to kind of offer a different perspective than if you had been just a practitioner or just a journalist?
I feel very fortunate because I'm so privileged to be able to interview people who are really leading this agenda. And having worked as an architect for many years, when I go visit people, when I go interview people, it's kind of a no-brainer. It's just a very easy conversation. I absolutely love what I do. I hope that translating some of this really technical information, because we had a lot of engineers writing for this book, into a language that is accessible and easy to navigate and easy to action. That's what my goal is, and that's what really we hope this book will unlock.
And Hattie, just finally, and looking not only at the book, but of course your experience and expertise, how do you see the future of the built environment? Are you hopeful for that we are moving in a more sustainable, conscious way as we build new cities? We all know more and more people are moving to cities, so the importance of building in the right way, let's say it is paramount. So how do you view what's ahead?
I have to say that despite a difficult year of 2024 with certain elections, I am hopeful because of the amount of activism I see within the profession here in the UK, which I know best. And I'd like to highlight the work of ACAN, the Architects Climate Action Network. They jump-started in 2019, right after Greta Thunberg and the school strikes. And they're a campaigning organization which has been incredibly effective at raising awareness of all these issues. And they have a fantastic YouTube channel with their webinars. When I started writing about this topic 15 years ago, people didn't know where to go for information. Now there's too much information and it's everywhere. So that's a good thing. I think awareness is there. I think delivering the projects is still really a challenge. And that's why every designer on every project needs to do the best they can and get the word out on what works.
Hattie Hartman there speaking with Carlotta Rebello, and Materials, an environmental primer, is published by Reba and available via its website. We zero in now on one previously mentioned material which we felt deserved a bit of extra attention. Earth, or soil, is not only useful and effective in construction, it's also an abundant byproduct of development work. So could reusing this material be the secret to boosting the circular economy in construction? Earlier, Monocle's David Stevens was joined by Dr. Rabia Sharef, a senior research associate and architect at Lancaster School of Architecture. Dr. Sharef's work centres around advancing knowledge in the circular built environment, and reusing earth is one of the keys to unlocking this. David began by asking about the history of earth as a construction material.
If we look at the ground under our feet, we have what we call the topsoil layer, the one we use for architecture. And under the top layer, we have what we call earth. And one requirement for this layer to be used for construction is to contain some clay. So in terms of techniques, we have many techniques, but I'm going to talk about two of them, the mud bricks, we also call it adobe, and rammed earth, or pisé in French. So they both use only earth and water, but they are manufactured differently. Mud bricks are made, let's say, like a cake, that it's not baked. We take the earth, we add water, and we put the mixture into a mold. And then we wait until it is dry, and we can use it as a brick for masonry. Rammed earth is manufactured with less water. We put the mixture into formworks, and we compact it. This information can help you to understand why earth is one of the oldest construction materials ever used by humans. We have archaeological evidence showing that it has been used for building structures for at least 10,000 years, dating back to the Neolithic period. For example, in the ancient city of Jericho, dating back to 9000 BC, they used mud brick techniques for their structures. This means that early humans quickly figured out that mixing soil with water could create strong and durable shelters, but they need to be dried in the sun and protected against rain. And even today, many people around the world live in earthen homes, not just in Asia or Africa, but also in Europe and America. So we can say that we have this very rich cultural heritage that is a real gold mine for masons, architects, engineers, and researchers. And we can say that this gold mine provides evidence that building with earth is possible and it can last for centuries.
A lot of your work is based around the circular economy, and this plays into that. So can you describe first the circular economy in this context, in the construction context, and how using earth and soil can help develop that?
The circular economy is about designing out waste and pollution, keeping materials in use, minimizing the extraction of new materials, and regenerating natural systems. So now let me explain why earth as a construction material aligns perfectly with these principles. The first reason is when we use earth as a construction material, we reduce our reliance on virgin materials. In many construction and infrastructure projects, we have a large volume of soil coming from excavation, and we usually consider this soil as waste. So if the soil is not polluted, it could be reintegrated into the loop, whether for the construction of walls, bricks, or other elements. By doing so, we will reduce the need to extract new resources like sand and gravel, which are already in short supply globally. The second reason is that earth is fully reusable and can be returned to the ground or reused in new construction without losing their integrity. For example, if a round earth wall is no longer needed, simply by adding water, it can be broken down, remixed, and repurposed. And we can repeat the same process indefinitely. And the good news is it does not damage the environment. It is important here to clarify certain things. If I simplify, we have two types of school of thoughts about earth. One school believes that when we have earth and water, we can add to this mixture some straw or other organic elements, and it does not damage the environment. They believe that adding cement or lime reduces the intrinsic circularity potential of earth. They accept the material limitations, and they have an approach that is to adapt the design to align with the material limitation and not the other way around. The other school of thought believes that it is necessary to modify the material to fit the architecture and regulation requirements. What we can say is that we need more research in this area to be sure that these two approaches align perfectly with the circular economy principles.
You've covered really some of the big positives that this can have on the construction industry. I wanted to look at the roadblocks to using this material. What is stopping earth and soil being used more in construction?
I think it's because urban architecture is facing many challenges. The first one is the perception. Many people still associate urban construction with poverty, or they view it as outdated. And some people may consider this material fragile and vulnerable because this material is sensitive to water. And that's why if we look at the research output, we can find many studies trying to provide evidence about the strength, capacity, and resistance of earthen walls. This lack of confidence, I would say, could be overcome very easily through education and awareness. Stakeholders like architects, engineers, and builders, they need to be trained to be able to use this material appropriately and with confidence. And they must learn how to work together because it shakes a bit the conventional organization of a project. Just as an example, the masons and researchers are often involved in the design phase and they participate in the decisions, which is not something very common in a conventional project. And another challenge, I would say, is related to the fact that we have to handle and transport a large volume of soil. Most of the time, on-site processing requires specialized equipment and a specific organization. For example, in the building in Lyon, l'Orangerie, the mason had to make the blocks on site 1 year before the start of the construction because the blocks need to be dry. So they need storage space, and it's also something that can be tricky in urban areas. So we can say that the key word here is collaboration, a strong collaboration between the stakeholders, with governments, industry leaders, and researchers. I think it's very important.
we've talked a lot about this in putting together this show about materials and their use, and new materials especially, as people aren't confident. They haven't seen them over, hundreds of years. They haven't been road tested maybe as well as insurers would like them to have been. Is that something that is a real roadblock for earth and soil being used in construction as well?
Yes, exactly. Most of building codes are designed with conventional materials in mind, like concrete and steel. Some countries like France or Australia have started to create specific guidelines for earthen construction, but they are far from having proper standards. But actually, it helps the people who want to try this material. Another big barrier that needs support from regulatory bodies is insurance, because earth is considered as a risky material, mainly because insurers are not familiar with it. So obtaining insurance or certification actually for earthen buildings can be very lengthy and expensive process. So yes, definitely regulatory bodies play a significant role here, and everything that I have highlighted here, it could be supported by a proper training and awareness, exactly what we are doing today, just making sure that people knows that it's possible to build with this material.
Dr. Rabia Sharef there, speaking with David Stevens. Lastly today, Monocle's Chris Lord has just got back from Munich, where he attended BAU, the world's leading trade fair for architecture, materials and systems. And he's here now to tell us about some of his findings. Chris, thank you so much for joining us. Perhaps for those of us who aren't initiated, can you start by telling us what exactly BAU is?
So BAU, in a way, it's almost the Glastonbury of the kind of German construction sector. So when you get to the big convention centre just outside of Munich, it's quite amazing to see just so many thousands of people all going into this space. There are 2,200 exhibitors in BAU, and each section of this vast convention area, there is no space left that's not given over to the event. And you have an entire huge hangar of a space given over to aluminium, to glass, to tools, to locks, to garages, through to then wood and so on, tiling, ceramics. And each of these huge spaces is dedicated to a different material. And really what it attracts is, it attracts developers, it attracts property, sales groups and all that kind of thing, and architects as well. But it is fundamentally for the construction industry. And so you see a lot of people, a lot of builders, frankly, walking around. And it has a kind of bit of an Oktoberfest vibe about it from the start. People are cracking beers open at sort of 9:30 in the morning while they're looking at carbon rods and things like that. So it's got a bit of a sort of festival atmosphere to it.
I wish I'd come with you now.
I wish you were there, Andrew. I think you would have enjoyed it a lot. And weirdly, it doesn't take itself too seriously. There is a sort of sense of people having a bit of fun of it. You happen across scenes like people clapping for a double glazed window opening and closing by itself, that kind of stuff. So it's a really good snapshot that shows you where building's going to go in the next few years.
Yeah, and comes at a time when I guess all these construction companies are under pressure to do things more environmentally soundly, to think about materials, to think about wastage and to think about insulation and all sorts of things. Now, we've asked you to do something very specific because our programme today is about materials, and we've got you to pick 3 materials to focus on what we saw about their futures and their potentials. Should we start in the world of metals with aluminium?
Aluminium, as I say, was dedicated a huge amount of space in BAU, and I think that is partly down to the versatility of it and the sense that it is renewable in as much as it can be recycled, it can be reused. It has a long life, but can still be refreshed and can be used in various different formats. One business that I thought was really, really interesting, which I confess I'd never heard of them before, Schmidt & Cern. These are apparently, and again, I didn't know this, they're one of the big 5 elevator makers in Germany, alongside the likes of ThyssenKrupp and so on. A family-owned business, 6 generations have been making elevators. And I actually spoke to one of the family from the Schmidt family who explained the value of materials when you do make an elevator in a block of flats. What is the value of walking into something that, as he put it, he described elevators as the safest form of transport in the world. And he said, when you get in it, you need to have that feeling when you step in. And he said that materials, aluminium, and clever use of it, or steel, aluminium, all this stuff, can be so important to make people feel that they're in a very protected space. And he said, for us, we've never got involved into plastics. We've never gone on down that route when we build our elevators. They've always got aluminium in there. They've got steel in there. They've got things that you can hold. And he said, most importantly, I asked him, what's the value of having buttons that you can actually push these days when you get into an elevator rather than a kind of digital screen? He was like, the most important thing is that you feel you've pressed something down. You've got an agency in this box when you get inside it. And in a way, that sort of touch of the metal on skin has a kind of important role to play, if you like, something real and tactile. And so aluminium, as you say, huge part of this. What I did think was quite interesting, it was sort of dotted around among some of the aluminium. There's quite a big focus this year on finding ways to repurpose materials, repurpose resources. And you could see some really innovative ways that aluminium can be reused and put into different projects.
Amazing. And you're right. I think whenever you speak to these lift companies, they see themselves as in the mobility game. They don't just see themselves as being an add-on for a building, and also as architecture pushes buildings ever higher. It's their feats of engineering as well. We'll talk about timber next. Again, I know that you saw some innovative players here.
I mean, wood was a major material at this year's Bow, I would say, and so impressive. When you walk around, you think you've seen every form of parquetry that there is, Andrew, but little did I know how much more there is to see. But a few things that really caught my eye. I think, first of all, in the section around using wood and timber as part of building, Eastern Europe is just so rich with businesses, startups in this world. They've got all those amazing Baltic forests and access to them. And you see so much smart innovation happening in that world. Austria also finding interesting ways that you can have a sort of appearance of reclaimed wood without all the difficulties that comes with that. You can still make load-bearing columns out of a certain kind of wood treated in a certain way that looks reclaimed, but actually can be made very strengthened by some processes. But a few bits that caught my eye. Estonia, I didn't know, is the largest exporter in Europe of prefabricated wooden houses. It's the third largest in the world. And there was a business there called Woodhouse Estonia, which is building these amazing and very beautiful prefabricated wooden houses and putting them all over the world. They're already talking to governments, not least the UK. She sort of hinted that there was some conversations with the UK government about finding ways that wooden structured houses could be rolled out very quickly at a moment when the UK government is trying to build a lot of houses. But I spoke to the general manager, Annika Kadeja, about the product.
To be completely honest, it's not perhaps so much different living in a wooden building and in concrete building if it's properly done. But today, in traditional construction sector, how do you provide the quality? And in this sense, there are different advantages in wood as it allows to prefabricate. And now when we are prefabricating, then the quality can be much, much higher. But as well, if you are using massive timber, then it also has healthier aspects as there is this natural ventilation and the indoor climate is much better.
And Annika, just at the moment there is, all over Europe, there's a problem with the need for more houses. You're talking to governments now, aren't you, who are interested in what Estonia can teach them, not least in the UK, potentially, about essentially fixing that with prefabricated houses?
Indeed, because we really believe that while using industrialized methods, modern methods of construction, we can provide rapid solutions. Today, for a 6-story apartment building, it takes twice less time to build it. But using steel, you need to use these industrialized methods. Building with wood, you can use also several methods. You can use elements, modules, and so on. And every technology has its own differences, but also possibilities to use wood as well.
God, well, an amazing company, and prefabrication, again, is one of those things that we're seeing more and more of. And this notion of using timber, we're seeing these ever higher towers made with cross-laminated timbers. And again, much of that coming, as you say, from the Baltics, from the Nordics, from Eastern Europe. So amazing. Finally, on the tiles.
A night on the tiles, Andrew, was certainly had in Munich. This was just a great product, a great business that I just frankly had never heard of before, called Grip Factory. And it really is, it's an invention. So the guy who founded this business realized that you could treat any ceramic, tile, marbled surface, anything silicon-based, with a chemical that creates very, very tiny holes in the surface. Completely invisible to the naked eye. You would never know that they were there. They demonstrated it in their booth. And the way they did that was they had 2 pieces of tiling on a kind of slant at an angle, and they had water running down it like a waterfall. And you could walk up the side that had been treated as if it was dry, rough land. And you try to walk on the other side, which they hadn't treated, and your foot immediately slips off. This product, I mean, it's just the pool sector, the swimming pool sector apparently has been completely remade by this product, because more and more people are realising its safety, but it's also got applications in places where they make food, where there's likely to be water, sometimes get on the floor, hot, humid environments. Oil rigs are even rolling this out to now. Anywhere that there is tiles, you can treat it in a way that when it's got water on it, it doesn't become slippy. And frankly, that was just an amazing product to see it work. And you can just imagine how far and wide that's going to be used, especially as we look towards this summer and refurbs of pools and leisure centres and all that kind of thing.
Amazing, Chris. So back next year for BOW?
Well, BOW is every 2 years, Andrew.
Oh, 2 years.
So we've got a couple of years. We've got a couple of years to wait for the next one. But I would happily go back. As I say, it had a bit of an Oktoberfest atmosphere once everyone got into it. And I know that probably some of those people had to be dragged out at the end.
Chris Lord putting the wow into BOW. And that's all for this week's episode of The Urbanist. Remember that you can get new editions of the show every week. Just follow us through your favourite podcast provider. You can also subscribe to Monocle magazine for regular reports on all things design, architecture and urbanism. Just visit monocle.com. This episode of The Urbanist was produced by Carla Rebello and by David Stevens, who also edits the show. I'm Andrew Tuck. Goodbye, and thank you for listening, City Lovers.